Welcome back to the deep dive. We are really glad you're here today because um, we're basically standing at the finish line of a marathon.
A very expensive marathon.
Yeah, exactly. A construction project worth potentially billions of dollars. And you know that feeling when you move into a new house and you're just standing there waiting for the keys?
Oh yeah, it's a great feeling.
Right, it's that exact moment. But imagine the house is well, a massive chemical refinery or a hydroelectric dam.
Which definitely raises the stakes a bit. It is the ultimate moment of truth for everyone involved.
It really is. So to understand this, we're looking at one of the most critical high-stakes sections of the FDI Silver Book. For anyone new to the terminology, that is the 2017 Conditions of Contract for EPC or Turnkey projects.
And specifically, we are zooming in on Clause 10, which covers employers taking over.
Taking over.
Are-
It sounds so simple, right? Like the contractor says, I'm done. They shake the owner's hand over a keychain, and just walk away.
I mean, we wish it were that easy. But in the world of EPC engineering, procurement, and construction, it is infinitely more complex than a simple handshake.
Because it's a legal transfer,
Correct.
right? Our mission today is to figure out how that transfer actually happens.
Exactly. It's the legal transfer of care, custody, and control. Up until this specific moment, if a storm hits the site or a fire breaks out or a piece of equipment just fails, it is generally the contractor's headache.
It comes out of their insurance and their budget.
Right. But the moment taking over happens, that risk shifts entirely to the employer. So, Clause 10 is the rule book for how that baton pass happens. And it involves this incredibly complex dance of notices, very specific deadlines, and some really interesting traps for the unwary.
Traps that can cost you a lot of money if you aren't paying attention. So let's unpack this for you. The source material breaks this down into a few critical areas. We've got the checklist, the timeline, the deemed trap, which I found absolutely fascinating, and the rules on partial use.
Let's start with the checklist. Subclause 10.1.
Yeah, what does it actually take to cross the finish line?
So subclause 10.1 is your gateway. It lays out criteria A through E. And the absolute most important takeaway here is that being done doesn't just mean being built. Physical completion is really just step one.
So the concrete is dry, the walls are painted.
That's the easy part. If you look at subclause 10.1, it says the works must be completed in accordance with the contract, which explicitly includes passing the tests on completion.
Which makes sense. I mean, the lights have to turn on, the water has to run, the turbine actually has to spin.
Correct. But then we get into the paperwork hurdles, and these are just as fatal to the process if you miss them. This is honestly where a lot of contractors trip up. Take a look at subclause 10.1b.
Right, this is the bit about the as-built records.
Yes. The clause states that the works aren't taken over until the employer has given a notice of no objection to the as-built records.
Okay, let's pause on that phrase. Notice of no objection. That sounds so incredibly lawyerly. Why not just say approval? Why use a double negative?
It's a very deliberate choice by FIDIC. If an employer approves a document, there's often this legal implication that they have thoroughly checked it, vetted it, and agreed that it is 100% correct.
Oh, I see. Which could shift the liability.
Exactly. It could shift liability for any errors right back onto the employer. So a notice of no objection is a much lower bar. It basically means, I've seen this, I don't see any glaring reasons to reject it right now, but the actual content is still your responsibility.
That is fascinating. So the contractor remains on the hook for the accuracy of those blueprints, even after they've handed the project over.
Precisely. And think about why as-built records matter to the employer. In a massive project, the final thing you built rarely matches the initial design perfectly.
You had to move a pipe because you hit bedrock, or you had to reroute a bunch of cables.
Right. And if you don't submit blueprints showing exactly how the thing was actually built, the employer cannot safely maintain it.
You definitely can't operate a chemical facility if you don't know where the high-pressure pipes are actually buried.
You really can't. And that exact same logic extends to subclause 10.1c, which deals with the O&M manuals and the operation and maintenance manuals.
The ultimate instruction booklet.
A very large, highly complex instruction booklet. We're talking potentially thousands of pages here. The clause says the employer must have given that same notice of no objection to the provisional O&M manuals.
Because if you just bought a power plant, you need to know which button stops the pressure from building up to dangerous levels.
Exactly. You cannot take responsibility for it safely without those manuals. So even if the plant runs like an absolute dream, if the manual isn't there, the contract says the works are not complete.
No manual, No handover. That is a strict rule. And then there's subclause 10.1d. This is one that people apparently forget all the time or just treat as a mere formality.
The training clause.
Yeah, the contractor must have carried out the training.
Specifically, the training described in Clause 5.5. It is not enough to just give the owner the keys in a giant manual. You have to actually teach their staff how to use the facility.
It makes total sense. It protects you, as the owner, from being left with a spaceship that you don't know how to fly.
That's the perfect analogy. Until the crew actually knows how to fly the spaceship, you haven't really delivered a spaceship, you've just delivered a very expensive paperweight.
$1 billion paperweight. Okay, so that's the checklist. Physical work is done, tests are passed, records are submitted, manuals are accepted, and the crew is trained. Finally, subclause 10.1e says a taking over certificate has to be issued.
Which brings us to the timeline, because this is where the drama really starts to pick up.
Right, the ticking clock. So walk me through the steps here. Say I'm the contractor, I've done all the stuff we just listed. I want to hand this thing over, get my retention money, and just go home. What do I do?
You apply for the taking over certificate by giving a formal notice to the employer. But there's a very specific restriction in the text here. You cannot give this notice more than 14 days before you think the works will be ready.
Oh, really? So I can't just send a notice 3 months in advance saying, hey, heads up, I'll be done eventually.
No, absolutely not. It has to be imminent. The contract requires certainty. You are effectively legally stating, I will be ready within 14 days, or I am ready right now.
Okay, so I send my notice. Now the ball is entirely in the employer's court. How much time do they have?
They have exactly 28 days after receiving your notice.
4 weeks. And what are their options during that window?
They essentially have two paths. Path one is the happy path. They agree. They issue the taking over certificate stating the date on which the works were completed.
Everyone is happy, the champagne is popped.
Exactly. But path two is a bit more complicated. They reject the application.
But they can't just say no.
Right. They must give a notice with reasons. They have to show their work. They have to specify exactly what work is missing, what defects need fixing, or what documents are missing from that checklist we just went through.
So it's a transparency mechanism.
Exactly. You can't just block a contractor with some vague excuse because you aren't ready to pay them or take on the risk. You have to give them a very specific to-do list so they can finish the job.
Okay, but here is where it gets really interesting to me. What if the employer does nothing at all? What if they just sit on the application? Like maybe they're disorganized or the project manager's on a cruise, or maybe they are deliberately trying to stall because they don't want the risk yet?
This is the silence clause, or formally, the deemed taking over mechanism. It is arguably the most powerful weapon the contractor has in this entire clause.
Walk us through how this trap works.
All right, so let's say the contractor sent the notice. The 28-day window for the employer to reply opens. The clock ticks down. Day 28 passes. The employer has not issued the certificate, but they also haven't sent a rejection notice with reasons.
Just complete radio silence.
Total silence.
Yeah.
If and only if the contractor has actually fulfilled the checklist, meaning the manuals, the training, the tests are done, then a legal fiction takes over. The works are deemed to have been completed.
Like automatically.
Automatically. But here is the real kicker, and you have to pay attention to the dates here. They are deemed to have been completed on the 14th day after the employer received the application.
Whoa, wait, so it backdates?
It backdates.
I just naturally assumed it would be deemed complete on day 29, once the time officially ran out.
You would definitely think so. But the logic FIDIC uses is that the employer should have made their decision reasonably quickly. If they stay silent for the full 28 days, the contract basically punishes them by backdating the transfer of risk to day 14.
That has huge implications.
Yeah.
Let's play out a scenario here to make this concrete for everyone listening.
Okay, imagine if a major fire happened on day 20. The employer is thinking, well, I haven't accepted the building yet, I haven't signed anything, so that fire is the contractor's problem. Their insurance has to pay for it.
Right, because usually risk transfers at the exact moment of handover.
Exactly. But then day 28 passes with silence. The completion date legally backdates to day 14.
Meaning that fire on day 20.
Happened in the employer's building. The contractor is not liable for the damage.
Wow. That is a massive incentive for the employer to actually open their mail and respond.
It forces efficiency. It prevents the employer from using administrative delay to unfairly extend the contractor's liability period. It basically says, speak now or you own it.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we've got the checklist and we've got the deadline trap. But let's talk about the real world for a second.
Yeah.
Construction projects are incredibly messy. Nothing is ever 100% perfect. Does the project have to be absolutely spotlessly flawless to be taken over?
This is the eternal battle between perfection and pragmatism. Subclause 10.1 addresses this directly.
This is the section about minor outstanding work, right?
Yes, subclause 10.1I. It explicitly says the employer can issue the certificate even if there are minor defects or outstanding work. But there is a very specific criterion attached to that.
Which is?
These defects must not substantially affect the safe use of the works or section for their intended purpose.
Okay, substantially affect safe use. So if the paint in the main hallway is scratched or a door handle is squeaky, you can still safely use the power plant.
Exactly. You shouldn't hold up a billion-dollar revenue stream because of a scratched door frame. The certificate will list those defects, and the contractor still has to fix them.
Right, they don't just get off the hook entirely.
No, they have to finish that work during the defects notification period. But the key is that the transfer of control goes ahead and happens.
But if the fire alarm system isn't working?
That affects safe use. That would be a perfectly valid reason to reject the application, but purely cosmetic things, no. The contract encourages the overall project to keep moving forward.
I can definitely see that phrase substantially affect being a massive breeding ground for disputes, though. Like, who decides what that means? The contractor will always say, oh, that weird vibration in the floor is minor, it's totally safe. And the employer says, are you kidding? That's a major safety hazard.
You've hit on the million-dollar question there. That phrase is inherently subjective. While the 28-day limit we talked about is mathematically precise, safe use is a matter of engineering judgment, and that is very often where the lawyers make their money.
Yeah, I bet. Moving on, I want to touch on something else in the text that really stood out to me. Subclause 10.2, taking over of parts of the works.
This is a fascinating differentiator for the Silver Book compared to a lot of other contracts.
Because usually in construction, say you're building a huge office tower, you might finish the first 5 floors and let the tenants move in while you finish the top 5 floors. That's pretty common, isn't it?
In standard construction contracts like the FIDC Red Book, yes, that is very common. But remember, this is an EPC or turnkey project. The whole turnkey concept implies you hand over the whole thing at the very end. You turn the key and the entire machine starts.
So does the Silver Book allow for partial takeover at all?
The default position is actually a strict ban. Subclause 10.2 says, parts of the work shall not be taken over or used by the employer.
Shall not. That is pretty strong contract language.
It is very strong. Unless it is specifically stated in the employer's requirements from the start, or unless both parties agree to it later on, the employer is flat out prohibited from using just a part of the facility.
Why is that rule so strict?
It's there to protect the contractor. Imagine you are building a complex factory. If the employer starts moving their staff and raw materials into one corner of the site while you are still welding and swinging cranes in the other corner, it's a nightmare.
The logistics alone would be awful.
It creates severe safety risks, it completely slows down your work, and it muddies the water on who is responsible if something breaks.
Right. Hey, you broke that window. No, your guys broke it when they moved the desks in.
Exactly. Or worse, who caused the explosion? The Silver Book assumes that the contractor needs exclusive control of the site to deliver a true turnkey project. So, no moving in early unless everyone agreed to it in writing beforehand.
But what happens if the employer just gets impatient and moves in anyway?
Well, the contract actually accounts for that kind of human nature. If the employer does use any part of the works, that part is deemed to have been taken over from the exact date it was used.
So if I sneak in and start storing things in the warehouse, I've legally bought the warehouse.
Yes, and all the responsibility for it passes to you immediately.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, speaking of the employer getting in the way, let's look at the final section we need to cover today. Subclause 10.3, which is interference with tests on completion.
This is a scenario that happens much more often than you'd think. The contractor is fully ready to run the final performance tests. Let's say running a turbine at full speed to prove it meets the output guarantee. But they can't.
Why not? Why would they be stopped?
Maybe the employer hasn't provided the necessary fuel. Maybe the employer's own staff are blocking the control room for some reason. Maybe the grid connection just isn't ready. The clause calls this being prevented by a cause for which the employer is responsible.
So the contractor is ready to prove the system works, but the employer is effectively blocking the test. What happens then? because they can't hand it over if they can't run the tests.
You're right, they'd be stuck in limbo. So the contract has a trigger to stop this. If this prevention lasts for more than 14 days.
There's that 14-day number again. FIDIC really seems to love 2 weeks.
It's just a standard, reasonable period in these contracts. If the delay is more than 14 days, either all at once or through cumulative small delays, the contractor gets relief.
What kind of relief are we talking about?
Two main things happen. First, the taking over is deemed to have happened. The employer essentially buys the plant, even though it hasn't been formally tested yet.
A risk transfers over to them.
Yes. The contractor still has to come back and do the actual tests later when they can, but the risk has moved.
And what about the financial side? Because delays cost money.
The contractor is entitled to an extension of time, or EOT, and payment of cost plus profit.
Cost plus profit. That is a very significant phrase in contract law, isn't it?
It is huge. In many contract clauses, if you are delayed, you might just get your costs, meaning your base expenses, labor, rent. You're just breaking even.
Right.
But here, the Silver Book explicitly acknowledges that the employer's interference is stopping the contractor from finishing the job and earning their expected margin.
So they get their profit margin stacked on top of the delay costs.
Yes. It severely penalizes the employer for interfering. It says, if you block these tests, you are going to pay the contractor as if they were working profitably during that entire time.
It really seems like the overarching theme of Clause 10 is basically, do not hold up the process.
That is the exact philosophy. The Silver Book is designed for massive projects where time is money, and we're talking huge amounts of money. Every single clause we've discussed today, they're deemed taking over, the strict ban on partial use, the cost plus profit for interference, they're all mechanisms to force the project to a definitive conclusion.
It prevents the zombie project that never quite finishes.
Correct. It forces the parties to either shake hands and finish it or fight it out formally, but it does not allow them to just sit around and do nothing.
So let's recap the big picture for you here. We started with the mission. How do we officially hand over the keys?
Step 1 is the checklist. It's not just bricks and mortar. It's the notice of no objection for your as-built records and manuals, plus the crucial training. You absolutely need the paperwork and the knowledge transfer.
Step 2 is the timeline. The contractor gives notice. The employer then has exactly 28 days to respond.
And beware the deemed taking over trap. If the employer stays silent for those 28 days, they are deemed to have taken over the project back on day 14. Silence equals acceptance.
Step 3. Perfection isn't required. Minor defects are okay as long as they don't substantially affect safe use.
But they still must be listed and eventually fixed.
Step 4. No partial taking over unless it was previously agreed. You get the whole car or you get nothing.
Which is to protect the contractor's control of the site.
And finally, Step 5. If the employer blocks the final tests for more than 14 days, they pay cost plus profit.
Which keeps the pressure firmly on the employer to facilitate crossing the finish line.
You know, when you lay it all out like that, it really makes you realize how much sheer power the administrative side of the contract actually holds. You could build the best bridge in the world with the best steel and the brightest engineers, but if you screw up the notices in Clause 10, you are in serious trouble.
Absolutely. The engineering usually gets all the glory, but the contract administration is what actually gets the project finished and paid for. In the Silver Book, the handover isn't just a ceremony. It's a rigorous, binding legal procedure.
If you were an employer, you clearly need to be awake and highly responsive during that 28-day window.
And if you are a contractor, you need to make sure your documentation is completely watertight so your application doesn't get rejected on a technicality.
It just forces active communication. You can't just hide behind your desk.
That's the beauty of it. It assumes that professional parties should communicate clearly and promptly with each other. And if they don't, the contract automatically imposes a default outcome to keep the real world moving.
Before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one thought lingering from our discussion earlier on minor defects. The clause says the employer can take over if the defects don't substantially affect the safe use.
Yes.
That specific phrase, substantially affect.
Yeah.
It sounds completely reasonable on paper, but in the real world, isn't that incredibly subjective?
It is the ultimate paradox of construction law. We try to legislate certainty 14 days, 28 days, but we are dealing with physical reality, which is always messy. What one seasoned engineer calls safe, another might call risky.
And that is probably where the biggest legal battles are actually hidden, Not in the precise dates, but in those subjective definitions.
Indeed they are.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Clause 10 of the FEI Silverbook. Whether you are building the plant or buying it, make sure you watch that 28-day clock.
And read the manual.
Definitely read the manual. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.
If you're interested in the templates, please visit our shop. The link is in the description.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see next time.